Hello and welcome to European SharePoint Training Week, a week of live webinars, ebooks and blogs from the top SharePoint experts in the industry. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Corey Burke, who will be talking to you about create a blueprint of your farm using PowerShell. Remember to join in the conversation about today's webinar on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @EuropeanSP and our hashtag is ESPC14. Corey is one of an impressive list of speakers for the European SharePoint Conference, which will take place in Barcelona, May 5th to 8th. Go to www.sharepointeurope.com for more information on the 100 plus sessions that will take place. All of the speakers from European SharePoint Training Week will be there, along with the likes of Dan Holm, Jeremy Take, Michael Noel and Rafael Lukovicskia. After the webinar we will have questions. Type any questions you have for Corey, question pane in the control panel. Some questions will be selected and answered at the end of the presentation. Today's webinar is being recorded and you'll be notified by email when it is available. And now I'm going to pass over to our webinar presenter, Corey Burke. Hello, Corey.
Hello.
Okay.
All right. So welcome everybody to this webinar on how to create a blueprint of your SharePoint farm using PowerShell. My name is Corey Burke. I'm a principal architect at Rackspace Hosting based out of London. So let's get started. So a little bit about me. I've been working with SharePoint since around 2003, and I've been supporting SharePoint here at Rackspace since we launched our support offering here in 2008. I've got a couple of writing credits to my name, contributing author for SharePoint, Professional SharePoint 2013 administration, as well as technical editing for Beginning SharePoint 2013 Building Business Solutions. You can contact me at any of the social media outlets that I've got listed here on this page. I'd be happy to chat with you about SharePoint or anything that Rackspace can do to help you meet your business objectives. A little bit about Rackspace. So Rackspace has been around for about 15 years now. I joined the company 7 years ago. In the last 5 years that we've been selling and supporting SharePoint hosting, we've grown to over 1 million dedicated seats that we support. This led to Microsoft announcing last summer that at the Worldwide Hosting Summit that we now carry 85% of the global dedicated hosting licenses. That's huge given our relative newness compared to some of our SharePoint hosting competitors. Last year we expanded our consulting services capabilities with the acquisition of US-based consulting firm SharePoint 911. With that we gained 6 MVPs that you're probably familiar with: Shane Young, Todd Clint, Laura Rogers, Jennifer Mason, Randy Driscoll, and John Ross. All these folks now work for Rackspace, giving us the largest collection of SharePoint MVPs under one roof. They're really helping us to grow and improve our support capabilities. So that's Rackspace in a nutshell. On the agenda for the slides today, we're going to talk a little bit about PowerShell and XML. So we're going to talk about this at a high level, and then we'll get straight into the technical goodness of it. We're going to talk about creating an XML structure in PowerShell, and then mining SharePoint for configuration data. And then we'll move on to talking about how we're going to actually stuff that configuration data into an XML file so that it can be used easily later on. Once we have that down, we'll look at how we go about accessing that data, as well as some usage scenarios where this might be useful. So why XML? XML is a widely used portable data type. It's hierarchically relational, meaning that it's great for one-to-one and one-to-many relationships, and it is formatted in a sort of tree hierarchy type format. Also, being a text-based format means that it's widely compatible. It can be used as a data source across Linux, Windows, as well as web services like SharePoint. Also, being text-based means that it's easy to update by hand using tools like as simple as Notepad. So to get started, priming PowerShell for .NET usage. So here on this page we've got listed a couple of different methods for gaining access to the SharePoint API. For any of you still using and managing MOS 2007 farms, there are obviously no commandlets, and STS-ADM has significant limitations in dealing with configuration objects or configuration data. So the first method that I've got listed here actually uses .NET Reflection to load the SharePoint assemblies, which give full access to the SharePoint APIs. You can still do this in SharePoint 2010 or 2013, but it's not really necessary. The preferred method obviously is to use add PSS snap-in with the Microsoft.SharePoint.PowerShell, which actually loads all of the commandlets that take care of a lot of the reflection stuff internally. Makes it a lot easier for you to dig around without mucking anything up. So once we've got the API loaded, or the .NET assemblies, or the commandlets, the first thing we got to do is start instantiating some objects. So again, here we have two methods for creating an object with PowerShell and the SharePoint API. Once we get the farm object, all further interactions throughout these slides are going to be the same regardless of which version of SharePoint you're actually running. So this will be the last slide that has anything that's significantly different between 2007 and 2010 or 2013. So with the 2007 method, we're actually calling the class directly and creating an instance of the farm object in SP_farm. With the commandlet, all of that stuff is taken care of for us in the background. It's much easier to understand and remember. So getting a little bit deeper into PowerShell, two of the most important commandlets to know in PowerShell are the get help and get member commandlets. I won't dig too deep into these, as anybody who's messed with PowerShell at all should be somewhat familiar with these already. But just to kind of look a little bit at what those actually do. So the get help commandlet. So if we could do a get help on that, we should get a nice little dump of all the different parameters and a little bit of the syntax and some of the descriptions of what the commandlet actually does. Some of the options you have down here, so for you got -examples, -detailed, -full. So these will give you a little bit more details if you want to know, if you want more examples or a much deeper dive into the actual parameters themselves. The other one, so then the get member commandlet. The way that's used is you actually get an object first. So in this case, we'll do WA equals get SPWeb application. Okay, oops, that's not what I want to do. I'm going to add specific web application here. So once we do that, we should be able to see that, okay, yes, we did get an object to that web application. So now what we want to see is what members, meaning which methods and properties this object actually has available to it. If I can spell right. Then now what you can see is a giant dump, especially for web applications. There are just a huge amount of properties, as well as a handful of methods. Methods you can think of as being sort of like functions, in that they're separate blocks of code that you can pass different parameters or variables into to do certain things like dot provision or migrate users, that kind of stuff. Properties are things about the web application itself, including child objects such as content databases or alternate access mappings or things like that we'll also look at as we go through this. So that's just a little bit about how to actually get a little bit deeper into PowerShell or into SharePoint to find out the types of information that you might actually want to document in an XML format. So as we move on to writing XML, so now that we have some idea of how to get information out of SharePoint, we're going to look at how to go about stuffing that information into an XML format. Here we're looking at the general overview of the steps involved in that process. The first thing is to create the XML variable. When we do this, we'll create a basic framework for the rest of your XML data that's going to follow. Next, we're going to actually query data from SharePoint using the methods we've already discussed. Once we have that data, we will insert it into new elements within the XML tree. It's worth mentioning at this point that element and node I use interchangeably throughout this presentation. I usually think of a node as an existing branch in an XML tree, whereas an element is something I consider to be something new that's being inserted into a tree. Just know that they're pretty close to being the same thing. All right, so creating the XML object. So here's basically our most basic starting point, is the XML template. Since XML is basically just a text string, we need to let PowerShell know that the text being inserted into the variable is actually XML. We do this by doing what's called typecasting, or just casting the variable as XML. This is accomplished by prefixing in the brackets there the XML that's in the sort of light green or teal color. this is just a way of forcing PowerShell to treat data in a specific way. Otherwise, if we excluded the XML in brackets, everything on the right side of the equal sign would end up just going in as a text string into the audit XML variable, which is not what we want. We want it to actually be formatted properly. All right. So getting the local farm object. So now that we have our basic XML framework, it's time to start getting data from SharePoint. At this point, we just want to document some farm data, mainly the build version and farm ID. There may be other options or other parameters that you want to actually document from your SharePoint farm, but for presentation purposes, just keep it small. So we do this by first getting an object of the farm. We do this with the SP farm equals get SP farm. And as we look down here, you can kind of ignore the select single node for now. I'm going to dig into that a little bit deeper in a later slide. But essentially what we're doing here at this point is selecting the very first farm node that we created on this slide here. So you can see here that we've created this farm node in the XML. So now we want to select that farm node, and then we want to set parameter or set attributes such as build version and farm ID. And both of those take a string as the parameter that gets passed into those. All right, and so now we'll move on to saving the XML to a file. So once we've created our XML variable and extracted our farm data from SharePoint and added the new attributes to the farm element in the XML, our next stop is to actually write the XML to a file. So this is done by calling the .save method for the XML object. When we originally cast the variable as XML, we gained access to a different set of properties and methods than your standard run-of-the-mill string variable. The .save method allows us to just give it a path or a file name as the parameter, and it uses that when it creates the actual file. And so as a demo of what we just talked about here, here's a full script with all of the last three slides that we just talked about. So the first thing we always do is I always add PS Snap-in with the Microsoft SharePoint PowerShell stuff in every one of my scripts, which allows me to not have to worry about whether somebody's running it from the SharePoint console or whether they are running it from a standard PowerShell command prompt. The next thing I typically always do is always of where I'm actually executing the script, so that any of my data output automatically goes back to that location. I don't have to go hunt for it. Because typically by default it'll end up going to your /users/username folder, which isn't very helpful. So the next thing again here, we're going to build our base XML template variable, which is going to have the very first line of defining the XML, and it's going to have our first node that I've got created here. So then we're going to get the object of the farm itself. We're going to then select the farm node that we created in our template. And then we're going to set a couple of attributes, the build version, which is going to come from the SharePoint object $spfarm.buildVersion, as well as the farm ID or GUID. And then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to actually save the XML file to the file system. So when we run this script, just clear screen here a little bit. So you can see that actually nothing happened on there, but it went very, very quickly. So the first output that we actually get is basically just this. We get the very first line of defining the XML, and then we have our first node farm, which includes the farm ID and the build version. So very basic, but it's a good starting point for our XML. All right. So now we've successfully saved an XML file to the file system. The next thing we're going to want to have to do is to read that file back into another script. Maybe it's because we want to add more data, or maybe we want to read from the existing data. For now, what we want to do is add more data to the XML. We really want to document as much SharePoint farm stuff as we can. So here you can see we've created the variable again for the XML data, except this time instead of defining it as a string, what we're actually doing is doing a get content with the file name of the XML file that we just previously saved to the file system. And again, you can see here we're casting this get content command as XML, so that as SharePoint reads it in, it knows that it's XML and stores it in the audit XML file or variable as XML content. So the next phase is going to be getting the web application data. So now that we've successfully read in the XML file, this little chunk of code actually grabs an object of the collection of web applications from the farm itself. And it does that by doing the get SP web application, and also includes central administration. Maybe you want to know, any kind of different configurations that we might have done to central admin, maybe port number, whatever. And it stuffs all that into the $webapps variable. So before we can start inserting each individual web app properties into the XML, we need to create the web applications node to insert them under. We don't have to have this extra node, but you'll find that as we go on, the data that starts to get really messy if you don't subcategorize your elements effectively, and you actually start to lose some of the huge relational benefits of the XML itself. So here we also introduced a couple of new methods from the XML object called createElement, which takes a text string as a parameter and append child, which also takes the XML element object that we just created as its parameter. So what we're actually doing is we're creating this element here called web applications, sticking it in this $new node, and then we actually do a audit.xml.farm.append_child $new node, which basically means that it's going to take this web applications node that we just created and it's going to append it to the farm node. So then the next phase will be So the next phase will be to actually loop through the web app collection and writing the properties of each web application to the XML. So again, we do this by creating a new element or node for each web application and setting attributes on that element. And then lastly, we call the append child method once again, this time at the web applications node, and one by one insert each new web application element. Another new item that you might have caught your eye at the very bottom is where web applications is inside brackets and quotes and is not separated by from farm by a dot. So this is due to an odd PowerShell behavior where if you're trying to insert a fully populated node into a node that doesn't have any other children, oftentimes what it'll do is it'll say that it can't append to a child to a string. It'll actually, for some reason, it'll see it as a string. By putting it in these brackets and quotes this way and eliminating the dot between farm and the first bracket, this will actually work regardless of whether the farm object has any children or not. Just something to keep in mind. This caused me a lot of headaches when I was first trying to figure out how all this stuff worked. All right, so next we're going to talk about searching XML with finding your data in the XML, all the data that we just stuck in there. Actually, let me back up a second. I actually have a demo for that. So getting the web app data. All right, so the demo we've got here, this is the full code. Again, we've got add PS snap-in, get our current location, read in the XML that we just saved to the file system. We talked about getting the web app collection for SharePoint, and then creating the web applications node. So then we append that node to the farm node in the XML tree. And then what we're going to actually do is loop through each of the web applications from the SharePoint object that we've got and start setting attributes on those, and then saving each web application to the XML and then saving the XML file itself. So once we run this, you'll see that it actually did dump a little bit of data to the screen about each web application as it was reading it from the API. So if we go back here now and reopen our XML data, you can now see that we've got under farm we've got web applications, and then we've got each web application with its own URL, web app ID, name, and those types of parameters. So that gives us a little bit of data about our web application itself and how we've actually stored it within this XML file. All right. So now we actually go back to, now that we have some data in there in SharePoint, the next thing we want to do is to be able to actually find data in XML. And the reason for this is that once we go to add more data, on the later slides, we're going to look at how we add alternate access mappings and content databases to this XML file. In order to be able to do that, we're going to have to be able to associate the content databases to their web applications in the XML in the same manner that they're associated in SharePoint. So here we're actually starting to set up our next exercise, which is to add alternate access mapping configurations to the web application nodes in the XML. So at this point, you can kind of assume that we've already read in the XML file. So now we're getting a collection of web applications from SharePoint again and looping through each web app. Next we want to find the XML node that correlates with the current web app. We do this by piping the XML object along with the location in the tree that we want to search into the where object commandlet, where we will search for the node with the name parameter that matches the display name of the current web app from the SharePoint object. So what we're doing here is taking this audit.xml.farm.webapplications.webapplication node, and this is actually a collection of each web application node, and then we're piping it to a where object, so we're actually going to search for the node that has a web application with .name that matches the $webapp.display name coming from SharePoint. So once we do that, then we're actually able to go and create an alternate domains node here underneath that specific web application. Once we create that, then we'll append that as well, and it'll loop back around. So I'll get a little further into that. Now we're going to actually get those alternate access mappings. So here's a more complete script that actually goes and gets alternate access mappings. So at this point, we've got the information that we need for our web applications. Probably not everything that we really need, but it's at least a good start. So now we're going to move on to documenting other subconfig data such as alternate access mappings. You should notice that the code here looks very similar to the code we just reviewed for documenting the web app config data. Not a whole lot of difference here. It's just changing certain things like the name of the elements that you're creating, whether or not you're doing setting intertext or appending child, that kind of stuff. So one of the new things that you'll actually notice here is the XML related method called setInterText. So this method actually takes a text string as a parameter and uses that string as the actual value of the node itself, making it the only attribute for that node. And I'll show you what I'm talking about once we actually do the demo for that. Everything else throughout here operates the same way that we've already discussed. We create element, alternate domain, another create element, incoming URL, which is actually going to go under alternate domain. And that's controlled here by the new aam.appendChild new element. So it takes this element that we just created and adds it to the alternate domain element. Finally, once the alternate domain element is fully populated, we then take that whole tree structure and append it then to alternate domains. And then once we're done there, we then save that to the file system again. So to demonstrate, all right, so here's the full code. Again, this should start to look familiar. Add the PS snapping, get your location, get your content, get a collection of web apps again, cycle through each of the web apps in the farm. Again, we're going to find the specific web application that correlates with the web app that we're currently looping through SharePoint on. We're going to create alternate domains, append that to the web application node, and then we're going to get a collection of our alternate URLs for the current web app in SharePoint. Once we do that, then we're going to want to loop through each of the alternate URLs and actually log each of those in the XML under its associated web application. For each alternate URL, we're going to have alternate domain. Under there, we're going to have the incoming URL, URL zone, and mapped URL, so that we have all the information we need to recreate those alternate domains down the road if we need to. And then finally, we're going to append each new alternate domain node back to alternate domains, and finally we'll save that file to the file system. So again, once we run this, see some stuff blow by. So you can see here where SharePoint's actually dumping incoming URL, URL zone, mapped URL. And we go back here and look at our XML again. So now you can see, instead of just a list of web applications, we've actually got web application with URL. Under there, we've got alternate domains. We have alternate domain for default, intranet, extranet, all of those. And then it goes to the next web application, next web app. So that gets all the alternate access mappings into your XML. All right, so next we're going to actually look at getting the content database data for your web applications. So here we have another for each loop to cycle through each web application. Looks very similar. and then through each content database connected to that web app. There's not a lot new here except that I chose to set just attributes for the database element instead of setting inner text or adding any sub-elements. Actually, I forgot to show you what the inner text looks like on here. So attributes end up looking like this, where it has URL equals the actual URL, web app ID equals that. When you do a set inner text, then the node itself just contains a single value. So that's the inner text. It basically says, okay, incoming URL is this value. There's no attributes on it. There's no sub elements. It's just that value. So that's essentially what set inner text relates to. All right, back to getting content database. So like I mentioned, I do mostly set attribute here, so things that are descriptive for these databases that there's not going to be multiple of, so name, database ID, status, whether or not it's read-only, and then the server that the database is a member of. Some potential additions here, you might create a site collections element under each content database. Then you can use that process that we've worked out so far to document configuration data around individual site collections themselves, maybe capture the size, the number of users in each site collection, whatever you want to do. So the point being that you can go infinitely low in the configuration objects and document whatever you want about your SharePoint farm. It's essentially up to you to decide what's relevant to you. But the process looks very, very similar no matter what you're pulling from SharePoint. So we'll come back here and do, let's close that. And so the script here is going to go and grab all the content databases for the web applications. Again, we're going to do add PS snap-in, get the current location, get the XML file, get the web apps from SharePoint, loop through each web app, find the web app that correlates in the XML, and then we're going to create an element called databases under those under each individual web app application node in the XML. And then we're going to append that to the web application node. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to actually do a get SP content database for the given web application from SharePoint. That will go and get a collection of all the content databases that belong to that SharePoint web app. Then we're going to do a for each loop through each of the content databases where we'll create a new element for each database and then do each of the different attributes that we talked about. And then again, each database will then get appended back to databases. And then once all the databases for all the web applications have been done, then we'll write the XML back out to the file system. So I'm going to run this. So a lot more information is being dumped out now. If we go back to our XML file, so now you'll see here we've got class.contoso.com. We've got a single database here called WSS_content_class. We've got the server, not read-only, status is online, database ID. You get down here for some of these. You can laugh at all the GUIDs. This is a demo farm that I use for other demonstrations that I do as well, for why you wouldn't want GUIDs in all your content database names. But essentially, if you did have a situation like this and you needed to migrate for some reason, there's no way you'd be able to try to hand document all of these database names and GUIDs so that when you migrate them to the new farm, they all get attached correctly. So if you want to learn more about how to mitigate all of that, I'll be talking about that in my actual presentation at the European SharePoint Conference in May. So that's grabbing content databases. All right, and so lastly, get service app data. All right, so this is going to be our last writing XML demo. Here we're actually going to document the service applications. Since the service apps are at farm level configurations and not web app level, we're no longer going to be looping through each of the web apps as we go through these scripts. Instead, we're getting an object of all the service apps in the farm and looping through them directly. We're also going to create a service applications node called service apps directly under the farm level as a sort of sister branch to the web applications node. Here you can see a series of set attribute methods that I set descriptive information on about the service app itself. So each service app has a type name, has a status, display name. Apparently put status in there twice, hooray. partitioning as well. So if you're doing multi-tenant type stuff and you've got partitioned service apps, you definitely want to know about that as well. So after that is done, I set the attributes on the service app itself, and I actually create some child nodes or elements for service application pool name, app pool account name, and then the proxy group that the service app is a member of. And then again, once this whole $new service app tree is fully populated, I then append that to the .farm service apps node. Once that's complete, then I write the XML to the file system again. So here's the complete script. And again, add PS snap-in, get location. So all this stuff should look very familiar. In fact, like this whole initial block here is almost the same throughout every single script. The only thing that's really different is what we're looping through and then what we're naming our elements, whether or not we're setting attributes or inner text or whatever. Those are the primary differences between each of these scripts. So once I actually execute the script here, clear the screen. I'm just going to dump a whole bunch of information about service apps. So actually went pretty quickly. So lots of information. You see we've got the actual service app account name there. That's pretty handy. If we come back and look at the actual XML, so we know we're not going to be looking at web applications. So let's go take a look, minimize that. And now we can see service apps. So now we've got Access 2010 services, status is online, we've got a type name, service app, app pool name, app pool account, service application proxy group. You see here in the next one, secure store application shows partitioning equals unpartitioned. None of my service apps in this farm are actually partitioned, but you can see that they would actually say partitioned or unpartitioned for each of these. All right, so displaying web app configurations. Now we get to actually play with the data that we've got in the XML file. All right, this little block of code gets the collection of web app nodes in the XML and displays the attribute information about each one. So assuming that maybe you took this XML and you've got it on some other system that you can run PowerShell on, you no longer have access to SharePoint, but you need to know information about your SharePoint form that you've already got in the XML. So this script does exactly that. So we add PS snap-in, get location, read in the data. So then what we want to do is actually get a collection of all the web apps from the XML. We do this by getting the $audit.xml .farm.webapplication.webapplications.webapplication. And so it's kind of counterintuitive. It actually looks like .webapplication, like you're getting a single web application. What you're actually doing is getting a collection of each web application node. And then what we actually do is do a for each loop for each $web app and $web apps. And then we dump the name and URL out to the screen. And so this will actually purely come from this XML file that we've got here. So you see it dumped it pretty quickly. But we've got, as it shows in the code here, we've got the name, SharePoint-class.contoso.com, port 80, and then the URL for that web application. So very basic, very easy to do. All right, so the next one is going to be a little more complex. So display databases for web apps. So in this instance, we actually want to grab a specific web application node in the XML, and then we just want to list the databases for that specific web application node. So this is where we get into XPath, where we use a method called select single node. So what this is this part of the XML API that PowerShell has direct access to, and this select single node allows you to specify in this, it's kind of a different format. You're not using dot notation anymore, you're using these slashes. But it's //farm/web applications slash web application. And then inside brackets is where you actually put your qualifier, what you're actually searching for. And so the attribute is always prefixed with an @ symbol. And then we evaluate it instead of using like -EQ or -matches like you would normally in PowerShell. You actually use an equal sign. It's again kind of counterintuitive, but that's how it works. And inside single quotes, you actually put the name of the web application you're looking for. So in this case, we're looking for portal.contessor.com. Then what we do is we get a list of content DBs. And what we do is we actually take this $web app that we just got this specific single node. It's all the way down here at the specific web application node. And now we use that as a starting point to get .databases.database. And again, what we're doing here is we're getting a collection of each database node. Once we've got that, we cycle through each of the, or loop through each of the content DBs in that collection. Once we do that, then we write out the name, status, and whether or not it's read-only. And so it's a very small script, basic. So when we run it, you can see it dumped out all the information from the XML file. So we've got WSS content underscore ugly, online status, whether it's online, whether it's read-only. Pretty simple, but that gives you some ideas about how you can search within XML to get down to specific nodes. When you know you've got multiple web application nodes, how do you find a specific one? Where you can target specific attributes of each web application node to get the right one that you want. All right, and then putting it all together. So all of this information actually came out of a project I did internally here at Rackspace called spaudit.codeplex. Or it's actually hosted at spaudit.codeplex.com. I did it as a way to keep sort of backup copies of our customer configs in an area that allows us to go back and reference them if we need to. If there's a full farm failure or whatever, we would always have a good dump of their information. Oops. Sorry about that. So you can see here I actually go a little bit deeper. I've actually got we've got the web applications, we've got alternate domains. Inside the alternate domains, we've also got IIS settings, so everything that SharePoint knows about the IIS configuration for that web app, including the port number, all that kind of stuff. So we'll go ahead and take a look at this. So this is a massive script. It's about a little over 1,000 lines of code, but it dumps just about everything from SharePoint that you would ever possibly need if you ever need to rebuild from scratch, which hopefully should never happen, but you never know. So when we run this script, you see a lot of data fly by. You can ignore all this ugly code up here. This is part of how you get the actual usernames and passwords out of SharePoint, because you have to decrypt them and all of that. And I got that information sort of third or fourth hand from somebody that got it from I think Gary LaPointe, one of his books. He actually documented in PowerShell how to actually get decrypt usernames and passwords out of the SharePoint database. Very handy. So when you run this, you can see tons and tons of information flying by. It shouldn't take too terribly long. Obviously, I have a lot of databases in this farm. All right, and we're done. So it took maybe 30, 45 seconds, something like that. So now we should have a much larger XML file. Oops, sorry, it's actually a long file. So that script, spaudit, actually puts out this farm dash and then the farm GUID, and that's part of the file name. So when we look at this XML, actually, you can notice quite a large difference, about 3 times the size of the demos that we've been doing. So when we look at this one here, here's where you can actually see that it actually did dump the usernames and passwords for all of my accounts for this farm. We've got build version, farm ID, timer service account, also the forest name from Active Directory. So then under each web application, we've got alternate domains, whether or not Kerberos is enabled, all the IS settings, including authentication providers. That's very useful information. Additionally, it also grabs, I think further down here, so we've got databases, outbound mail settings, web application policies. So if you've given anybody manual full read or full write access to your web application, you may not have that documented, and that's not something, if you have to rebuild your web application, that's not something that will just automatically come back when you reattach your databases. Same with people picker settings. I don't have anything custom set there. So lots of information. That's just web apps. If we look at farm services, so we've got OSearch. That's just the sort of WSS search that nobody really uses in standard enterprise. But if you're in Foundation 2010 or 2007, that would be Foundation search. Incoming email. Then we get down to farm service applications. So here I've got type name, whether it's online, offline. Some of these actually have databases as well. So then I've got nodes here for database, DB server, database type, and then the database name. So that's really good for being able to reattach your databases back to the service apps correctly. And then lastly, I've got actually list farm solutions. I don't have any installed in this farm here, but if I did, there would be it would list the farm solutions here with what they're deployed to, if it's global or if it's per web application. And then last, I've got farmer servers, which actually lists the services that are actually enabled or disabled on the farm. So Lotus Notes connector is not enabled on this specific server. Central admin is, app services. It's very useful to know. And the database server. All right. So where you can go from here. So imagine you need to duplicate your farm for development or migration reasons. You want to visually represent your farm in SharePoint or maybe even Visio. This is a great way to get that XML data out of SharePoint into a format that you can actually use. Or you can just file it away for rebuilds or migrations. Another great potential option would be AutoSP installer. So that's something we've adapted here at Rackspace over the last year, is to start using AutoSP installer as part of our installation methodology. So the ability to actually go and modify the AutoSP installer XML either through a scripted set of questions or to be able to go and grab this information out of an existing farm and automatically dump that into an AutoSP installer XML format to go and reproduce that farm is hugely powerful. So in summary, we covered gathering useful information from SharePoint, storing that information in XML, getting it back out of XML, and then using that output XML in some example scenarios. Thank you for attending. I think we're going to be opening it up for questions now. Hope you all enjoyed it.
Thank you, Corey, for a great presentation. And now to deal with some questions. We're getting a lot of questions asking will the slides be made available, and I can let you know that the slides will be made available next week along with the webinar recordings, and you'll receive an email notifying you of that. One question I have here for you, Corey, is it possible to list out the SharePoint service apps running on each server?
Yes. So one of the examples I gave there was to actually extract the service application configuration information into the XML, and then once it's in the XML, you can then write code to go in and extract that information from the XML to display it in however you want to display it for the format. So yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thanks very much, Corey. We're running out of time now, so that's all the time we have for questions today. But before we go, I have one question for you all. Are you coming to Barcelona? For those of you that don't know, the European SharePoint Conference 2014 will take place on the 5th day of May in beautiful Barcelona. For more information about what you can expect at Europe's largest SharePoint conference, check out our website, www.sharepointeurope.com. Currently we have a range of competitive pricing options on our website. We also have some fantastic group booking offers available. The bigger your group, the bigger the discount. Check out our pricing page for more information. That's all for today's webinar. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope you can join us for more great webinars this week. Goodbye.